The desert is supposed to win. It dries rivers before they can exist, turns rain into a rare event, and makes every gallon of fresh water feel like a miracle. But in some of the driest regions on Earth, that rule is being challenged. Massive volumes of seawater are being stripped of salt, forced through huge pipelines, and pushed deep into land that has no natural rivers to depend on. But every drop that reaches those dry regions comes with a price, and a growing question about how long this can last. This is the story of how desert nations are trying to manufacture a lifeline where nature never gave them one. Saudi Arabia has one of the harshest relationships with water anywhere in the world. It has no permanent rivers, very limited renewable freshwater, and a climate that makes surface water painfully difficult to hold on to. That forced the country into a long struggle with scarcity, one where every solution felt temporary and every delay made the next crisis worse. For years, the kingdom relied heavily on groundwater. Some of that water had been trapped underground for thousands of years. It looked like a blessing, but it came at a cost. Unlike a river or a seasonal reservoir, much of that deep fossil groundwater does not quickly refill. Once it is overused, it is not easily replaced. That meant Saudi Arabia was spending down a resource that had taken ages to accumulate. The underground reserves looked huge, but the long-term math was far less comforting. At first, that was enough to buy time. But time, in a desert, runs out fast. The answer to their problem was sitting on the coastline the whole time. Saudi Arabia went all in on desalination and building one of the largest seawater conversion systems in the world. The kingdom is the world's largest producer of desalinated water, and recent official and sector sources describe national production capacity in the range of roughly 11.5 million cubic meters per day. Instead of waiting for rain that may never come or draining aquifers that may never recover, the country began manufacturing fresh water from the sea. Reverse osmosis became especially important because it is generally more energy efficient than older thermal desalination methods, even though the wider system still includes multiple technologies and large treatment facilities. And that leads to the next problem. Making fresh water is one thing. Getting it across a desert is something else entirely. A desalination plant on the coast does not solve much for a city hundreds of kilometers inland. So Saudi Arabia built what is essentially a man-made water lifeline. This is a huge system of pipelines, pumping stations, transmission lines, purification facilities, and storage infrastructure that carries water far from the sea into the interior. This is the part that gives the story its scale. But the water does not move over flat, convenient land. It has to move across punishing heat through difficult areas and into places where exposed surface water would lose too much to evaporation. That is why buried or enclosed transmission matters so much in desert environments. Water moved this way is better protected from heat, contamination, and simple loss. And the engineering challenge is hard to overstate. This is a national-scale infrastructure designed to keep millions of people supplied in conditions where nature offers almost no easy backup. So by this point in the story, Saudi Arabia had done something extraordinary. It had found a way to create water, and then found a way to move it where it was needed most. But there was still one more leap. What happens when water is used to reshape the desert itself? Once a large-scale water supply exists, the desert changes in a new way. Not everywhere, not all at once. But in selected areas, water begins doing more than supporting taps and treatment plants. It starts enabling agriculture, managed landscapes, and vegetation projects in regions that otherwise could not sustain them. That does not mean the desert disappears. It means the desert meets resistance. And that resistance can take many forms: irrigation, restoration, managed vegetation or barrier planting aimed at reducing erosion and supporting land use in fragile environments. But no system this large comes without consequences. And Saudi Arabia's water solution carries some very real ones. Desalination solves one problem by creating a new set of responsibilities. It requires major energy input. It depends on expensive infrastructure, and it produces brine, the highly concentrated salty discharge left behind after fresh water is extracted. If that brine is badly managed, it can increase salinity and temperature near outfalls and put pressure on marine ecosystems. Saudi water sector materials and outside analyses both note the importance of managing desalination's environmental footprint, though including better discharge practices and more efficient technologies. Then there is the inland cost. Pipelines need maintenance. Pumping needs electricity. Every extension of the system creates another dependency. In other words, Saudi Arabia did not eliminate vulnerability. It just changed its form. Instead of relying mainly on scarce natural freshwater, the country now relies on a giant engineered chain that has to keep working day and night. That is why this story is impressive, but it is also why it is fragile. And to understand where this kind of water strategy can lead, it helps to look at another desert country that went down a similar road, then pushed it in a different direction. That country is Israel. Israel also had to confront the reality of building life in dry land. Much of the country's south is taken up by the Negev, in a desert region where natural water limits are impossible to ignore. For decades, Israel expanded water delivery through national transfer systems, then strengthened the whole system with desalination and reuse as natural sources came under increasing pressure. Mekorot and international water policy sources describe how Israel's national water system evolved into an integrated network linking supply, desalination, transport, and recovery. But Israel's real distinction is what came after. Instead of treating water as something to use once and discard, Israel became one of the world's leading examples of wastewater reuse. Multiple policy and research sources report that roughly 85 to 90% of treated wastewater in Israel is reused, much of it for agriculture. That changes everything in a desert. It means one stream of water can help sustain homes and cities, and another can go back into food production and managed land. It means the system becomes layered, not linear, and that opens the door to something more ambitious than basic survival. It opens the door to vegetation management. One of the clearest examples of that idea is found in the Negev. In Israel's dry south, water from national systems, reused wastewater, and broader water management made it possible to support agriculture and planted landscapes in places that naturally lean toward sparse vegetation. The most striking example is Yatir Forest, planted on the edge of the Negev and often discussed as one of the most famous dryland afforestation projects in the region. And this is where the story becomes especially interesting. Because Yatir is a patch of trees, and it became a research site. Scientists have used it to study carbon exchange, water flux, heat, drought stress, and how semi-arid forests behave under extreme conditions. Research associated with the site shows why it has become so important in dryland climate studies. That gives the vegetation project a much bigger meaning. But even here, the story is not perfectly clean. Because what species belong there? How much water can be justified? What happens during prolonged drought? What local ecosystems are being replaced or disturbed? Even successfully planted areas can suffer losses, ecological tension, and long-term uncertainty. So once again, the desert is not defeated. It is negotiated with.